Okay, today we have a customized Stoxpoker.com tutorial on the best SitNGo analysis program on the market. It's called Wizard. And before we take a look at Wizard, we need to look at a little bit of the background on the SitNGo. So I prepared a basic tutorial for us to get us up to speed. And the main thing is that chips are not money. And the way you can see that is, suppose we have $1,000 buy in SitNGo with a starting chip stack of 1,000 chips. Then in the beginning, you're exchanging $1,000 for 1,000 chips, and so it would appear that each chip is worth $1. Okay, if you were wanted to exchange each chip and said how much is each one worth, the answer would be $1. And yet, if we're assuming that we have 10 entrants and it's a standard payout of 50% for the winner, 30% for second, and 20% for third, then if you win, you cash out with every single chip, right? You beat everyone, so you have all the chips in play, and yet you only get half the prize pool, $5,000. Not so bad, but not $10,000 either, and so that would be 50 cents a chip. Why is this a sudden decline in chip value? What's happening where chips are suddenly worth less? Well, the reason it occurs, of course, is that second and third places cash out money, but they don't have any chips. Alright, so when you win one of these SitNGos, the guys who you bust out, say the guy you bust out playing heads up, he doesn't have any chips at the end, and yet he's still taking home money. And that's extremely different from, say, a cash game, where you cash out with whatever chips you have. Therefore, chips are non-money, and the more chips you have, in fact, the less each individual chip is worth. Now, equity is the term that we're going to use to refer to the dollar value of chips. So we've got chips, which are the little discs that you bet, raise with, etc. And then we have equity, which is how much the chips are worth. And ICM, the independent chip model, is the mathematical procedure to convert chip decisions into dollar decisions. And that's exactly what we want to do. Right? In a cash game, we want to maximize our chips or our money. It's the same thing. But in a SitNGo, we only care about maximizing our money. And what Wizard is going to do is it's going to provide us a framework to take any decision we want to make for a pre-flop all-in and convert a chip one into a money decision. So without further preamble, let's take a look at the software of the day, SitNGo Wizard. The first thing we're going to do is look at Analyze a New Game. That will not be the primary way we're going to be looking at these in the future, but it's a good start, and it's going to get us to the main analysis well. So start off by choosing the site that you're interested in. Pick PokerStars, and then choose the blinds. So this would be, for instance, if you had a particular idea you wanted to run by, and said, hey, is this play going to be winning me money, losing me money? Maybe you're debating a hand with a friend, and you just want to come up with your own situation. And soon we're going to look about how to automatically analyze your games. But for now, let's assume that we're looking at a small blind shove. So the way this works is I'm going to type in the stack of the first guy to act, and keep on going. And Wizard is going to automatically give us, so there are 13,500 chips in play in a PokerStars 9-man SitNGo. And let's say that the first two guys have 4K each. We'll make the next guy have 2,500. Just kind of pulling these numbers out of a hat. And what we're mainly going to be looking at is the analysis. That's so key. And if we have these stacks, then the last guy has 1,500. And we show the program which player we are by picking his cards. So let's give ourselves a pretty easy warm-up. Let's assume we have aces, and we'll see whether we should push or fold. Okay, so it says we should push. Now, one thing, of course, is that this is purely pre-flop all-in poker. So if you're playing low blinds, it can analyze whether you should make a raise, whether you should make an early laydown. It can tell us whether we make more money by trapping rather than just shoving. But that's okay, because that's no longer a math problem, that's strategy. And this is going to help us with the math of chips and equity. Okay, what do these numbers mean? Well, the EQ fold percent is your equity when you fold as a percentage of the prize pool. Now what I'm going to do in both this video and every future video I make when I pull up Wizard is I'm going to use a cool trick to make the math easier. And what I'm going to say is, let's suppose we're playing a 10-man $100 buy-in. In that case, the total equity is 10 times $100, so $1,000. And therefore, when we have, say, a 10% equity, that would be $100, and that's what we'd start with. And EQ fold here of 12.15, that would be $121.50, or about 120 bucks if we're being pretty informal. And that's the best way to interpret these numbers. So if we fold, we have 120. If we shove, then the value of that decision, we now have the equivalent of 150 plus in equity for a difference of over $30. So that would be a huge edge in a $100 buy-in. And the diff percent is the main thing they're interested in. It's the difference between pushing and folding. If it's positive, you're making money. If it's negative, you're losing money. Now, one thing to notice right off the bat is, why is EQF, equity when you fold, 12.15? We started off with 1,500 chips, correct? And now, if we fold, we only have 1,400 chips. So we could fold, have fewer chips than we started with, and our equity, which we assume starts off at $100, is now 120. The reason that we've lost 100 chips yet gained equity is because there are 4 guys who have now been eliminated. This guy's gone, this guy's gone, this guy's gone, and this guy's gone. And because there are 4 fewer players that can finish in the money, your chips have gained equity. And that's a common thing. With each player that gets eliminated, you gain equity. And that's another reason why you want to have a style where you avoid a lot of big pots during low blind play, because that chips that you're risking are worth more money than they would be in, say, a no-limit cash game, and you need a really big edge to play a big pot relative to what you would need in a cash game. So this is all well and good, and you're probably thinking, why do I need this bozo to tell me to shove with aces? It's pretty straightforward. So let's say that we have a hand that's a bit less obvious, and the one I like to play around with is 10-7 offsuit. Kind of a lucky hand. And with 10-7 offsuit, assuming this guy calls with 18% of hands, which we'll look at in a second, we are winning over $10 by shoving as opposed to folding. Now, the key thing is, will this guy actually be calling with 18% of hands? So we click on it and we see what the top 18% includes. And essentially, it's any suited ace, any offsuit ace besides the weakest ones, pretty much any pocket pair, high suited Broadway cards, and king-queen. And assuming that that's accurate, and that's not so bad a guess, you'll have a lot of guys who play very tight and will be tighter than that, and we'll look at examples of looser guys. And the thing is that if he's calling with 18%, then you're correct to shove, and not only to shove, but to shove with 100% of hands. Okay, you should shove literally any 2 here with these stacks if he's calling with only 18%. And how do you know how wide he's calling or how narrow? Well, you don't know exactly, but Wizard's going to give you a decent guess. And if you have a guy who's really loose and has been calling a lot, you'd want to widen this. If you're playing against a total nit, then you could even narrow it. Maybe he's only calling with a mid-high pocket pair or a very high ace. And so you combine reads you get on your opponents with stats if you're using tracking software, or you can go to Wizard's defaults, which are very good if you don't have a better idea, and that'll give you an idea. And if he is calling with 18, then you're correct to push 100%. So what does that mean? That means if we go to, say, deuce-3 offsuit, the weakest hand in heads-up, it's even worse than deuce-7, because the 7 can be useful, then we're still winning close to $7.50. And that's because there's already 300 on the table. Over 80% of the time, he's just going to be folding and giving us the blinds. And usually when he does call, since high unpaired cards significantly outnumber pairs, we're going to be up against two unpaired high cards and be about a 2-to-1 underdog. And that's why we're correct to shove with any two cards here. So now you might say, well, I think the guy that I'm playing with is actually a bit looser. And how loose is he? Well, maybe he's shoving calling with definitely any ace, definitely any pocket pair, and let's say he's calling as loose as Queen 8 offsuit. Okay. And that is going to be top 41.7. This would be very loose. You encounter very few opponents who would call this widely. But let's for the sake of argument say that that's the case. Okay, then deuce 3 is an obvious fold. How strong a hand do we need? Well, here we get a list. Okay, we'd be correct to shove with any pocket pair, any ace, just about any king, any solid queen, as well as many hands that are very robust, such as 7-8 suited, and play very well against premium hands that might call us. And we can take a look here. For instance, let's say, okay, that would be to adjust the stack. Let's say that we have a 9-10 suited, and that's a shove. We're winning close to $3. And so even if he's calling extremely wide, you're still correct to shove with a lot of hands. And in particular, no matter how wide he's calling, realistically, any pocket pair and any ace, you should be shoving with effective stacks of 10 blinds or fewer. Now, another really cool feature the Wizard has, and I didn't know about this until recently, and very, very cool feature, is we take a look at the chart. And the question is, let's take a look at a weaker hand. Let's go back to 10-7. Okay, now if he's calling with the 41.7, then we're correct to fold the 10-7. We saw with 18% we were correct to shove. What in between would be the cutoff? Okay, what number would there be such that we'd be directly even if you were calling with that percent to shove? The answer, we're going to look at a chart. So go to Tools, click on Charts, and I'll put this so that we can see it. And what this is saying is if the guy's calling with, say, 0% of hands, then obviously we're doing pretty good. And we'd be winning a lot. If he's calling with 100%, we're losing a lot. And the crossover number appears to be about 35%. Okay, so if he's calling any narrower than 35%, we're going to be winning money from the shove, and if he's calling any wider than 35%, we're going to be losing money from the shove. And you can also use the chart to isolate calling ranges of an individual opponent when you're pushing or shoving, if it's not just heads up. But this is the easiest way to look at it, is when we're heads up looking at these decisions, and clearly the narrower he's calling, the more we're making, and if he's calling very wide, then we begin losing more. So that is the chart. Again, we go to Tools and Charts to get there, and we'll be looking at that from the perspective of the caller as well. So the moral of this story is that you are correct to shove very widely with effective stacks of 10 blinds or fewer. In other words, when either you or your opponent has 2,000 or fewer, when it's folded to you in the small blind and you have an opportunity to steal as the small blind into the big blind. What we're going to look at next is when you are the big blind and you're considering a call. So we'll do that. And if you want to go back to the home screen at any point using Wizard, you just click the little home button. Bang, we're back. And let's analyze the new game again. And this time, let's make it on the bubble, because the bubble is going to make the result I want to give a little more dramatic. And we will give, say, 4,000 to the first guy, 4,500 to the next guy, and 2,500, 2,500, sure, okay. And let's actually make it so that the earlier guy is shorter stacked. And we both the small blind and us have around 4,000. Okay. that will give us a little more interesting situation. And to show what we're the big blind again, we're going to just pick big blind cards, pick pocket aces. Again, will give us an easy decision. And the reason it's giving an error message, we have to tell them that this guy's shoving on us. Okay. Now, if we have aces here, we're correct to call, obviously, and we're making a significant amount. Okay, we're making close to $80 on this call. But clearly, it's not always going to be aces when the blinds are. And let's make the blinds, in fact, the 100, 200. Usually at this point, 200, 400s have been more common. Okay. And now let's say that he's shoving. 20% looks about right. And let's give us a pretty strong hand. Let's say we have suited ace-7. Okay. Now our big win goes to a fairly big loss. And the reason that's happened, we have a way above average hand, right? So it's folded to the small blind. He shoves. Presumably he's going to be doing that kind of widely. And we're correct to fold a really strong hand. Not just correct, but calling here would be a huge mistake. Okay, we'd be losing around $70 on average. And the reason that that's the case is because we're on the bubble. And this guy who's a much shorter stack than us, if he were to if he were to lose, we'd automatically be in the money, and we do not want to be involved in a gamble for our entire tournament equity, and we need a very strong hand to do so. So if he is opening with 20%, we would need pocket jacks or ace-king to play. Pocket jacks are better, ace-king, and that's an extremely narrow range, of course, and that's because, you know, he'd be very bad off as well if we called, and if he were to shove and we were to call with a hand like ace-7 suited, we would lose a lot on average, he would lose a lot on average, and the guys who would win, the cutoff would gain tremendously, because suddenly he'd be pretty much guaranteed to be in the money, since this guy and I are about even stacked, so he would go from being unlikely to finish in the money to guaranteed money. And the button would also be guaranteeing the money, and these guys would be gaining a tremendous amount of equity that we would be losing. So, against a narrow shoving small blind, we are correct to fold up to very strong hands. And what kind of hand will we need to call? Well, we would need, again, jacks or ace-king suited. But let's say that 20% is pretty narrow. So let's say this guy knows that you have to fold most hands, and better guys will, and their shove a lot more widely. So let's say that his shove is consistent with any hand besides total junk. Okay? And we'll just randomly put it about 83%. And now we're still correct to fold the ace-7 suited, just barely now. And instead of losing about $75, now we're losing about $12. But that's still pretty significant in a $100 buy-in. And now we're still losing money. And in fact, we would need up to ace-10 suited would be the weakest suited ace we would need to call. And we can again look at the chart. Let's say, for instance, that we did have ace-10 suited. Okay, now we'd be correct to call. And how we know we can look and say how much are we winning or losing depending on how wide he's shoving all in. Again, we'll go to Tools, Charts, and now if he's shoving very narrow, if he's shoving pretty much only aces or kings, we lose a lot. And if he's shoving about 65% is the cutoff. So if he's shoving wider than about 65%, we're correct to call. Otherwise, we should fold. And the moral of this story is you're correct to call against a narrow shoving or wide shoving big blind when it's for your entire tournament equity on the bubble. And it's that's one reason why really good guys are going to be very aggressive in this situation, because they know that you can't call without a premium hand. And even guys who don't know ICM and equity and all this stuff are going to see intuitively that they want a money, and this guy is looking like he's going to be the bubble boy, and so they're going to need a very strong hand. Now, of course, we can convert to chips as well. Maybe we're playing a multi-table, maybe we're just curious. So we go to Options, Chip Equity Mode, and clearly this play is going to win us chips. Alright, because one, the pot is laying us odds. We started with 700 in the pot before he shoves. And if he's opening this widely, ace-10 suited is way above average. And we're winning a tremendous amount of chips in this call. And yet we're losing money. And that goes back again to the chips equity difference. Well, actually, we're winning money. But if we had, say, ace-7 suited, then that is a money loser, and yet we're still winning a tremendous number of chips. So that's, again, the chips equity difference. And that's really the key things here. So we've looked at chips versus equity, and the fact that if it's folded to you in the small blind, you need to shove very widely with effective stacks of 10 blind or fewer, and like this guy would be doing correctly. And when you're the big blind, you should not be calling particularly wide. Now, the really cool thing about Wizard is that you don't have to actually put in these exact hands. You can get it to automatically look up your own hands. And the way to do that is to open a tournament folder. And usually it's going to be under Collin, Program Files, Poker Stars, Full Tilt, whatever your site is, and then Hand History, and then the name of the account you play under. And I'm going to take a look at, so this will be I have some hand history saved for Stoxpoker into Collin, so I'll pull those up, but this would be whichever directory you're normally putting your hand histories in. And again, Poker Stars, Full Tilt, just about all the common guys will automatically save your hand histories onto your hard drive into Collin, Program Files, Poker Stars, Full Tilt, whatever, hand history would be the directory. And what it's going to do is it's going to give us every hand that we've played, okay, first hand, second hand, etc., the cards we've had, number of players left, our position, our stack, what the blinds were, what happened before us, what we did, and if it is a pre-flop all-in, potentially, it'll give us a yellow if it's close, a close decision, a green if it thinks we were definitively correct, and a red if it thinks you were definitively wrong. And at first you should definitely consider looking at all of these and making sure you like them. And after you go on a little bit, if you do this for all the games you play, which I strongly recommend, I've been using this program for a very long time and playing for much longer, and I still do with all my games. And what I personally do is I go to Show All Games, so this is under Options, General, Hand Filter, and I only show possible errors. And what that's going to do is it's going to give us a lot fewer hands to wade through. So after you get used to this, that's definitely something to consider. And so here, let's look at one that it says we've made a mistake on. Okay, so this is a situation when the blinds are 200, 400. I'm looking to be really aggressive, and possibly too aggressive. Now, before we say definitively whether this is a mistake or not, we have to make sure we agree with the calling ranges. Okay, because you never know based on, every opponent's different, right? So some guys are going to be calling a lot wider, a lot more narrow, and in this situation, okay, it says Kings of Cards is going to be calling with 16%. And considering that he's not one of the blinds, he's not going to be defensive, he's got a bigger than average stack. I think he might actually be a little bit tighter, and say 15%, about right. This guy here, this would be for all of his chips. He's in the small blind. I think he's also might be a little tighter, but at the same time, he's going to be the bubble boy anyway. If he folds, he's going to have the shortest stack, so he's not going to be super tight. And I think prop, because this is a higher stakes game relative to, it's 100, so guys might be a little tighter than they would in, say, a 6 or 16. And let's say he's also about 16%. And this would still be a fold. And in the 10-man 100, be losing about $16 here. So what I would say to myself is that with effective stacks of around 6 blinds, I would be incorrect to shove a mid-suited jack into 4 opponents. And you look at the range you should be doing that with, and you learn. So next time I wouldn't be shoving quite so wide here, and I would probably make a laydown there. and you can learn from all your games. And any one I click on, it's just going to show. Okay, so here. Now this is a hand, so I've got 7-4 off, and the blinds are 200, 425. And even though these guys will be calling kind of wide, and it's true, I probably will be losing equity from this hand. This is one where I talk about in SitNGo strategy. If you fold, your stack is going to be about 1100 after the blinds pass you next. You no longer have stealing fold equity. And ICM can account for situations when the blinds are going to hit you next hand. So you would be correct to fold this when there is, say, a guy here and a guy here, and you could wait for a better spot. But when you're about to get blinded out, sometimes you need to make a stand with any two, and that's just one of the few limitations of the independent chip model. And the last thing I'm going to do is take a look at a cool thing that Wizard allows you to do, which is to quiz yourself. So you just click Start Quiz, and it'll give you these hand problems and make you decide. So difficulty average, sure, that's the main thing you're going to be looking at, is whether you want what difficulty you want, and you can change other parameters as well. But make sure you want the difficulty and the type of game that you're interested in. So I'll click OK. And it automatically begins pulling up a quiz. And okay, so here we've got a guy shoving 1700. This looks like a clear pot odds call, and hopefully I won't blow the quiz on my own tutorial video. Yes, I got it. And now you can go on and quiz yourself. And that is the last feature I'll show. So that is how to use SitNGo Wizard, and I'd be happy to field more direct questions on the forums, and I hope you guys enjoyed. So good luck at the tables, and enjoy Wizard. Signing off.